Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari. Jasodanandana Brajana Jana. Jasodanandana Brajana Jana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada again. Thank you for coming. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayana Namaskritam Naram Shevara Narottamam Deva Saraswatam Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtapraesha Badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Jai, thank you everyone for coming. Today we'll be reading from the Srimad-Bhagavatam, 10th Canto, Chapter 48, verses 15 through 16. Okay, 15 through 16. But what's on the board, just 15? Okay. Uh-oh. There, okay. Hare Krishna. Let's see. Padavane Janir Apo Daranyan Shirasa Nripa Arhane Nambadir Divyer Gandashrabusha Notamaihi Padavane janir apo. Dadanyan shirasa nripa. Arhanin ambadir divyer. Ganda shrabhushanottamaihi. Padavane janir apo. Dadanya shirasa nripa. Arhane nambadir divyer. Gandashra bhushanottamaihi. What word is backwards? All right, word for word translation. Pada, their feet. Avane janihi, used for bathing. A, all over. Apaha, the water. Daranyan, pudding. Shirasa, on his head. Nripa, O King Parishit. Arhanena, with gifts. Ambaraihi, clothing. Divyaihi, celestial. Ganda, fragrant sandalwood paste. Shrak, flower garlands. Bhushana, and ornaments. Uttamaihi, excellent. So I'll read the second half of the verse and word for word. Architva shirasanamya padav anka gato mrijam prashraya vanato akrudaha Krishna ramav abhashata. Architva, worshipping. Shirasya, with his head. Anamya, bowing down. Padao, Lord Krishna's feet. Anka, on his lap. Gato, placed. Mrijan, massaging. Prashraya, with humility. Avanataha, his head lowered. Akrura. Krishna Ramo to Krishna and Balaram. Abhashata spoke. Translation and purport by the disciples, just translation by the disciples of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jaya. Translation. O King, Akrura bathed the feet of Lord Krishna and Lord Balaram, and then poured the bath water on his head. He presented them with gifts of fine clothing, aromatic sandalwood paste, flower garlands, and excellent jewelry. After thus worshiping the two lords, he bowed his head to the floor. He then began to massage Lord Krishna's feet, placing them on his lap, and with his head bowed in humility, he addressed Krishna and Balaram as follows. Amagyantamanandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Shakshumiletam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitan Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kapaturubhyashta Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Padvitanam Padnevyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhattavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. No Hare Krishna today? Thank you everyone for coming. Of course, gratitude to the people who are here and online. And of course, I can never forget my mother and my brother, His Grace Jaya Jagannath Prabhu, and the many devotees who have contributed to my Krishna consciousness. As usual, I'll start class with a quote that sets the theme of what we'll be discussing today. I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but hey, that's my routine. So, this quote is by Brian Carter, whoever that is, and he says, quote, "Your lifestyle, how you live, eat, emote, and think determines your health." End quote. So let me repeat that. Quote, "Your lifestyle, how you live, eat, emote, and think determines your health." End quote. So in this regard, based on this topic today, I would like to discuss the difference between our style and our lifestyle. So what's the difference? Style means to dress for success on the outside, and lifestyle means to dress for success on the inside. So this brings us to the subject matter of who is Akrura. So it's described that Akrura is Lord Krishna's uncle who worked for the demon Kamsa externally, but who ultimately worked for the divine Krishna internally. It's like the difference between a crooked cop and an undercover cop. So, although a crooked cop looks good on the outside, he's ultimately bad on the inside. On the other hand, take an undercover cop. Although an undercover cop looks bad on the outside, he's ultimately good on the inside. So similarly, although Akrura worked for Kamsa externally, he ultimately worked for Krishna internally. And so, so this theme appears throughout not only our teachings, but all universal spiritual teachings. There's a saying, you cannot judge a book by its cover. You may miss out on a great story, or you may miss out on a bad story, depending on what people has in their heart. And so a couple of more examples that explains this, this understanding is that it's described in the Srimad-Bhagavatam 10th canto. For reference, 10th canto, chapter 6, verse 9. It's described that although Putana looked like a devotee on the outside, it's described that she had the heart of a demon on the inside. On the other hand, it's described in the Srimad-Bhagavatam 6th canto, chapter 14, verse 1, that although a demon named Vitrasura, of course, he was a demon on the outside, but it's described that he had the heart of a devotee on the inside. So as mentioned before, you cannot judge a book by its cover. So the lesson to be learned is this, is that although we may have the outfit of a devotee, but if we don't have the infit of a devotee, then it will lead to our degradation. On the other hand, even if we don't have the outfit of a devotee, like Akrura, like Vitrasura, but as long as we have the infit of a devotee, then it will lead to our elevation. So therefore, today's verse is describing Akrura's devotional service to Lord Krishna. Why? Because he had the infit of a devotee. Savaimana Krishna pada ada vinda yorvachamti vaikunta gunana varnane. This verse is similar to the Ambarish verse where it's described that Akrura basically used all of his limbs and his resources in Krishna Bhakti. And so, so we'll be discussing, basically, that's the theme of what we'll be discussing today. So, it's very simple to understand the importance of one's, to understand the importance of having the infit of a devotee. Just take politicians. Why do politicians ascend to power? Because they dressed for success on the outside, whether with their education, whether with their clothes, whether with their money, right? But why are they ultimately removed from power? Because they didn't dress for success on the inside. So what this essentially means is that as far as devotional life is concerned, it's described that essentially the difference between a devotee and a demon is not necessarily what we look like on the outside, what we speak on the outside, or not even what we do on the outside, but what is our consciousness on the inside. Yasyasti bhatir bhagavatiya kinchana sarva gunas tatra samasate suraha. What distinguishes a devotee from a demon is your consciousness, sarva gunas, qualities like humility, like tolerance. Now, you cannot see these things, so we could put on a show for people. Like, so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in one article, he says, the article is entitled Sri Guru Tattva and Seva. He says, real humility is never found in an external show of humility, which is actually mere duplicity. So actually, you cannot see good qualities, but unfortunately, the problem with pretending to be humble is that usually sometimes we use that false humility to get something we want, right? Then after we get that object or that person or some resource we want, then what happens to our humility? It's out the window. And so there's many pastimes like this, like the pastime of Hiranyakashipu. So it's described that Hiranyakashipu, he performed very difficult austerities to become the king of the universe. And so basically, there's a saying, every man wishes to rule the world. Unfortunately, the world rules every man. So same with Hiranyakashipu, he had a desire to rule the world. Now, what do you have to do in this material world to rule the world? You have to undergo some austerities. And what are those austerities? For most politicians, they have to go to law school, medical school, this school, that school, so many years of school, right? Just to become what? The king of the world, right? And then what? In less than what? A few years, they're put in prison. Why? Because they couldn't rule themselves. So we can understand that, obviously, ruling oneself is by far superior than ruling the world, because although politicians, they perform so many austerities to rule the world, but because they couldn't rule themselves, where are they now? In prison. Or they're on a run, they're fugitives. So what is the use? You're wasting your time performing 10, 20 years of austerities of going to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, law school, medical school. It's a waste of time. Similarly, it's described that Hiranyakashipu, he performed so many austerities, and he was performing these austerities for a demigod named Lord Brahma, because it's described that Lord Brahma has some powers that could be delegated to him. So he wanted to please Lord Brahma. And it's basically described that the purpose of life is not to please demigods or to please anyone else in this world, but the purpose of life is atapum bir dvisha shrestha branashram vibhagashaha swanatidasa dhamasa samsiddhir hari toshna shushi kishore kishori ki jai. The purpose of life is samsiddhir hari toshna, to please Lord Krishna, Hari. Because he can remove your obstacles ultimately to anything, material progress or spiritual progress. He can remove whatever obstacles are blocking that progress, spiritual, material. And so even in the Gita, Krishna says those who worship demigods are actually worshiping me alone, but they're worshiping me in an improper way. Why? Why does Krishna say that? Because everything emanates from Krishna. Aham sarvasya prabhavo mata sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajate mam buddha bhava samavitaha. In the Gita chapter 10, Krishna says, I am the source of everything, both spiritual and material. Everything emanates from me, including this material world, the demigods, and other living entities. So whatever abilities anyone has, that's ultimately coming from me. So you're actually worshiping me when you honor someone else in an improper way. And so there is, I want to go on a tangent of kind of elaborating on that, but I think I'll maybe, if I have time, I'll come back to that. But the whole point is that Hiranyakashipu, it's actually described in the Bhagavatam that Hiranyakashipu, Shri Shri Kishore Kishore Ki Ja. It's described that Hiranyakashipu was humble. Can you believe that? Now, why do you think it would say that Hiranyakashipu was humble? What type of, or I could say in another way, what type of humility did Hiranyakashipu manifest? Can anyone say? Unfortunately, I don't have the reference with me, but there's a verse that says Hiranyakashipu was humble, and his voice was choking when he was approaching Lord Brahma with prayers. So what type of humility is this? Yeah, false humility, right? It's false humility. Why? Because he wanted something from Brahma. And so it's described that Lord Brahma was pleased by the austerity of Hiranyakashipu, that he delegated his powers to Hiranyakashipu. In this way, Hiranyakashipu had the power to rule the entire, not the world, but the entire universe. Actually, but the lesson we could take from Hiranyakashipu is that, yes, even by false humility, we could become very powerful, whether you're truly humble or whether you're falsely humble, you could become very powerful. So that's a lesson we could take from humility. Just like there's a saying, a seed cannot germinate in the light. It must be buried in the ground. Why? In order for it to become a very powerful tree. In much the same way, we cannot become powerful by putting ourselves above others, but only by putting ourselves below others, like that seed in the ground. And so, with Hiranyakashipu, he put himself below Lord Brahma. My dear Brahma, you know, you're such and this, you're this, that. And then when he got the powers, I hate you, Brahma, I want to take over your kingdom. This is precisely what happened. So the lesson is, as I mentioned before, whether you're truly humble or whether you're falsely humble, you could become very powerful. There from the Bible, Jesus says, for whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So Hiranyakashipu became very exalted, even from false humility. However, the lesson we can learn from this Hiranyakashipu pastime is a nice analogy, that even if a tree, let's take the greatest tree in the world, the biggest tree in the world, a sequoia or a redwood tree, right? It's probably the tallest, most powerful tree in the world. It's so tall, it's so wide, it's so powerful. But still, a construction worker or an axeman can still cut it down, right? So in much the same way, when Hiranyakashipu became too demoniac, too proud, Lord Narasimha, with his transcendental nails, cut his pride down. Not only his pride, but his very life itself. So this is a lesson we can't take. Yes, we can become very powerful through false humility, but we should always know that the Lord can always cut us down, cut down our pride. So this is why it's precisely why it's always important to practice tender love and not pretender love. And so this is a lesson we could take in our own devotional life. Now, moving on. So the whole point is that although Hiranyakashipu was dressed for success on the outside in light of the theme of this topic today, although he was dressed for success on the outside, but because he didn't dress himself in good qualities on the inside, yasyasti bhaktir bhagavatiya kinchana sarva gunais, it led to his degradation. So there's a nice quote. It says, quote, if my shoes were made of humility, my dress of compassion, my hat of respect, my jewelry of gratitude, In my perfume of determination, I would be dressed for success. And so, although I didn't write it in my notes at the present moment, but this analogy could be expanded in many different ways. There's many verses in our teachings, also in the Bible, that I didn't reference today or write down, that essentially explains that how we should clothe ourselves. It uses this analogy, how we should clothe ourselves in good qualities. Now, this analogy could be expanded, just like, suppose it's wintertime and you're walking outside, but you're wearing summer clothes. What will happen? You will die, right? So what do you need? You need winter clothing, right? In much the same way, it's described that when cold-blooded persons, places, things, and circumstances surround us, then we should clothe ourselves in good qualities. Why? So we won't feel that cold-blooded pain. So this is precisely why we dress ourselves in good qualities. Now, it's very simple that fashioning yourself in name brand clothes, how much does that cost? Thousands of dollars. Fashioning yourself in humility, how much does that cost? Nothing. It just requires your time and your time and your hearing, your attentive hearing. And so we see that although dressing ourselves externally costs thousands of dollars, but it cannot bring one any happiness when things don't go one's way, right? You may be dressed in Gucci, Prada, Tommy Hilfiger, Michael Jordan, so many name brand clothes, but if someone ignores you, if someone criticizes you, if somebody betrays you, then none of these things can bring you any happiness. This is precisely why we dress for success on the inside. Although it doesn't cost anything, it can bring one happiness when things don't go our way, when people ignore us, when people criticize us. Why? Because that cold-blooded circumstances, just like I said, in the winter time, you wear winter clothing, so you won't feel the effects of the winter cold. In much the same way, we clothe ourselves in good qualities, so we won't feel the effects of cold-blooded persons, places, things, and circumstances. And so this is a very important lesson to remember, and this is precisely what we're meant to learn from these great saints who are described in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Now, the difference between a demon and a devotee, analogy that can be used is like that between the difference between, in school, a class clown and a valedictorian. Now, can anyone tell me the difference between a class clown and a valedictorian? What is your definition? What is the distinction between a class clown and a valedictorian? Jaya, you want to get the mic? Yeah, sure. So I'm going to have to repeat so I won't misrepresent what you say also.
Well, you asked the question, what is between valedictorian and class clown? Okay. I was pretty skilled in the
Class clown. We should
class
say.
clownism.
Class clownism.
Valedictorianism seemed like it was the person that was serious, and I know I was never really serious. So maybe the difference is one is serious and one is not serious.
Yeah, that's basically essentially what I was going to say. Any more for elaboration? Any other? Want to further that? No? Oh. So yes, so the difference between a class clown and a valedictorian is that a class clown or valedictorian is serious about their education, and a class clown isn't. So, same thing. So it's basically described that the difference between a devotee and a demon is that a devotee is very serious about their spiritual education, whereas a demon isn't. And now this could be elaborated on in many different ways. Now, why do parents send their children to school? So they won't, you could say, destroy themselves or destroy others. Just like Jitendra Prabhu, who's been in this Prabhupada disciple, who's been in this community for, almost 50 years, if not 50 years. He says when he was around 5 years old, he was in the top floor of his house, an attic. Somehow or other, he got a hold of some matches. He knew how to light them. And he threw this match in a closet, and he just watched it burn for like a few minutes. So his parents heard the fire alarm go off, or they smelled some smoke. I don't know if they had fire alarms back in the 50s, but they definitely smelled some smoke. So they rushed all the way upstairs, and they saw, here he is, Jitendra, or James back then, just as a 5-year-old boy, just watching the fire burn and burn and burn. And why did he, you could say, burn his closet down, almost burned his house down? Because he had no education, right? No education. So why do parents send their children to school? So they'll learn how to, you could say one thing, so they'll learn fire safety. So what happens if you don't go to school, learn your ABCs, learn your 1, 2, 3s, learn what things are harmful to us, what things are helpful to us. If you don't learn these things, then like Jitendra, as a small boy, you'll use that fire to destroy yourself and destroy others. Similarly, the purpose of spiritual education is so we can learn how to use the resources of this world to help us and others and not harm us and others. So it's described that these resources of material nature are like fire. Fire is neither good nor bad. It depends on how you use it, right? A controlled fire in a stove is good. An uncontrolled fire in a forest or in a closet is bad. In much the same way, it's described that if we control the fire of our thoughts, words, and actions through good qualities, it will lead to our elevation. If the fire of our thoughts, words, and actions are uncontrolled through bad qualities, it will lead to our degradation. So this is the importance of spiritual education, or becoming a spiritual valedictorian. So I have another question to you guys regarding, you Prabhus and Masajis, regarding a valedictorian. Now, where does a valedictorian happiness come from? Where does their happiness come from?
Sorry, I can't help being amused because when I went to school, such a person would wear a badge.
Such a person will wear a badge that they're valedictorian. And in school, they have the honor roll too. The honor roll, right? And so if you're not on the honor roll, then without saying, you must be on the dishonor roll. You're not worthy enough, right? And so we could see this causes people to become competitive, become envious. But actually, the class clown is probably the most peaceful person in the school, because he doesn't care whether he's on the honor roll, dishonor roll. Those who are trying to achieve the top position, we see they're the most miserable, actually. And so, but anyways, is there any other definition? And where does the valedictorian happiness come from? Can anyone say, where does their happiness come from? Just anything. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I guess this is a guess, since I've never been valedictorian. So I would guess that you say happiness, right? You say happiness, right?
Yeah, where does their happiness come from?
I would say one thing that comes to mind is maybe pleasing their parents.
They're pleasing, yes. So, yeah, that's one answer. They're pleasing their parents. They're pleasing their teachers. They're pleasing their own prestige. Parents, teachers, or you could say parents, professors, and prestige. So keep along with the P's. And but actually, it doesn't matter whether you're a valedictorian or not a valedictorian. The final analysis is that if you go to school and you're a good student, your happiness, so this is a very important point, your happiness comes from passing your own exam. Your happiness never comes from someone else passing their exam, right? So we see throughout all universal spiritual teachings, these great spiritual valedictorians, where does their happiness come from? Their happiness comes from them passing their own character exam. Their happiness never comes from somebody else passing their character exam. So as long as we pass our humility and our tolerance and our forgiveness test, then what difference does it make whether others have or haven't passed their humility, tolerance, or forgiveness test? In other words, have you ever seen a valedictorian at graduation give a valedictorian speech? And they say essentially, although I'm valedictorian, I'm very miserable because my fellow students didn't pass their exams. Have you ever seen that? I've never seen it, but as practicing devotees, or you could say as immature devotees, sometimes we may kind of indirectly glorify ourselves as valedictorians, spiritual valedictorians. Although I'm in valedictorian, I am so miserable because my fellow devotees didn't pass their character exam. So therefore we label people, he's arrogant, he's proud, and we waste our time talking about and criticizing other devotees. But have you ever seen a valedictorian criticize other students who fail? No, they're just in happiness and bliss. They're not wasting their time discussing whether others have or haven't passed their exam. Why? Because passing our exam, a valedictorian, whether they pass their exam is inside their control. Whether others pass their exam is outside their control. So why do they worry? They don't worry about things outside of their control. So this is a lesson we could take in our life. Whether or not we pass our own character exam, our own humility, tolerance, and forgiveness test, that's inside our control. Whether others pass their humility, tolerance, or forgiveness test, that's outside our control. So if things are outside our control, then why are you wasting your time talking about them, wasting your time whether others are proud, arrogant, this and that? So there's a nice saying, I mentioned it many times. Happiness, what type of happiness? Valedictorian happiness. Happiness and freedom begin with the clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within our control and some things are not. It is only after you have faced up to this fundamental rule and learned to distinguish between what you can and can't control that inner tranquility and outer effectiveness become possible. So this is described how we become spiritual valedictorians. And we see that although Hiranyakashipu tried to kill Prahlad Maharaj in many different ways, he threw them off of a mountain. He put them under the feet of elephants to make them into a chapati. He put them into a fire to make them into burning hot oil to make them into a pakora. He did so many things, so many demoniac things, but nevertheless, Prahlad Maharaj, what was his prayer to Lord Narasimhadev? May my father attain liberation. He never wasted his time saying, oh, my dear Lord Narasimhadev, Hiranyakashipu, he's so proud, he's so arrogant, he's so demoniac, he's this and that. Why? Because if our happiness is dependent on people respect or dependent on people passing their character exam, what does that mean? That means if no one ever passed their exam, that means we will never talk about Krishna. We'll only talk about people's faults. And we see that. So that's the difference between a devotee and a demon. If we're so absorbed in other people's fault, wasting our time, that probably indicates that we're probably not reading Prabhupada's books seriously. We're probably wasting our time on social media, Netflix and stuff. And it's no problem because we all have our faults. But if we have our faults, why are you wasting your time talking about someone else's fault? So therefore, Lord Buddha says, he says, not the perversities of others, not their sins of commission or omission, but his own misdeeds and negligences should a sage take notice of. Even in the Bible, Jesus says, he who was free of sin, let him be the first to cast a stone. So there's a vivid analogy in this regard. It's not a good analogy as far as we're about to take prasadam next. But the analogy gets the point done. So anyone will have this realization if you live with anyone in your house, whether it's a roommate, a wife, a husband, friends, or even in a temple among other devotees. Everyone has this realization. It's because it's not like there's one bathroom per person. It's one bathroom per many persons. So what happens usually when somebody goes to the bathroom? Number two. Then they do their business and then they leave. And then less than a few minutes later, somebody else enters the bathroom. And what happens? What the heck is this? You cannot tolerate the smell when you walk in the bathroom, right? So forgive me for this example. However, when we ourselves use the bathroom, we don't smell anything. We don't notice anything. So what's the lesson? The lesson is that we could tolerate the faults that come out of us, but we cannot tolerate the faults that come out of someone else. And this is Maya's, you could say Mahamaya's illusory potency. Just like when you go to the bathroom, you think, there's one other analogy in this regard. So it's described that Lord Rishabdev, yes, was it Rishabdev? Yes, it's described that Lord Rishabdev, when he renounced his kingdom, it's described that he had over 100 sons to inherit his kingdom. And so when he renounced his kingdom, he came a wandering avadut, a wandering ascetic. And so he would go from this village to that village, this forest to that forest, this jungle to that jungle, to show how to become detached from material life. And it's described that many demoniac people were beating him, spitting on him, and criticizing him, insulting him. But he never became disturbed. Why? Because he was a spiritual valedictorian. His happiness only came from him passing his own character exam. His happiness never came from somebody else passing their character exam. So he was always peaceful, content, happy, just like a valedictorian. But to keep these materialistic demoniac people away, it's described that, forgive me for this, he covered himself, his entire body, in his own stool. Can you believe that? But, however, it's described in the Bhagavatam that his stool smelled like fragrant flowers. So there was no bad aroma emanating from him. Why? Because he was a Shakti Avesha avatar, incarnation of the Lord. Now, so what's the lesson we can learn? The lesson we can learn is that if our stool smells like fragrant flowers, then we can consider ourselves a Shakti Avesha avatar of the Lord. But if it doesn't, then don't waste your time finding fault with others, because you also have the same faults. So this is a lesson we could take from our teachings, that if we're not a Shakti Avesha avatar, if our stool doesn't smell like fragrant flowers, then don't find fault with others. You also have the same faults. So this is one lesson. So basically, this is the essential difference between a demon and a devotee. A devotee is a spiritual valedictorian, and a demon is a spiritual class clown. So as practicing devotees, we fluctuate between our divine and our demoniac nature. But still, this is why we hear in Bhagavatam to share these teachings with others, so we could make better choices in life of how we could become a devotee at every moment, and not just once in a while, or when it's convenient for us, or when we use our false humility to get something. Then that's our choice. If we do, then we'll find that you could experiment with it. Everyone can experiment with it and see how that works out for you. It probably won't work out too well for you, and that's what our teachings describe. So it's better to become actually truly humble instead of falsely humble. And what is our time? So we have 8:20 almost. So there's one last thing I'll share, maybe a couple more things. So it's basically described that Akrura, he externally, you could say, was a demon because he worked for a demon, even though he was the uncle of Krishna. Same with Vitrasura. I mentioned Vitrasura. So Vitrasura is a long story, but he was a king in his previous life. He committed a mistake. He was cursed to become a demon. But nevertheless, even though he was a demon, he had the body of a demon. He had devotee consciousness. And so, can anyone tell me what other pastimes or what other figures or characters or personalities in our scriptures who were demons externally but devotees internally? There's a couple I could think of. Maybe there's more, but can anyone tell me any other Personalities? Wait. Bali Maharaj. Bali Maharaj. Vitrasura. Yeah, I already mentioned Vitrasura. Vitrasura. Anyone else? Here's a hint. He's related to Bali Maharaj. Yeah, Prahlad Maharaj. He's the first one. So it's described that Prahlad Maharaj, even though he was a devotee, he was born in a family of a demon or demons in a society, not only a family of demons, but a whole society of demons. So it's described that that when Hiranyakashipu was off in the forest performing many difficult austerities, the demigods, they saw that Hiranyakashipu's palace was, you could say, unguarded because he was the most powerful being in the universe. And so they decided, the demigods thought, let's devise a plan that when Hiranyakashipu goes off to the forest and performs austerity, we will kidnap his wife, Kayadu. Why? Because she's carrying who? Hiranyakashipu Jr. And if Hiranyakashipu Jr. is born, then we'll have another lifetime of tyranny. So therefore, when this demon child is born, we will kill her. So this is precisely what the demigods did. When Hiranyakashipu was off in the forest performing austerities, the demigods were in the process of kidnapping Hiranyakashipu's wife, Kayadu. And but it's described that at that moment, Narada Muni, this great saint who had the power to travel all over the universe unrestrictedly, that he prevented the demigods from kidnapping Kayadu. He tells the demigods, my dear demigods, you will not be able to harm this child within the womb of Kayadu, because although he's born in the family of demons, he's actually a great devotee of the Lord. So even if you wanted to harm him, you couldn't, because he will be protected by the Lord. So please release her, and I'll educate this boy within his womb by speaking to his mother. And in this way, he will become fully enlightened when he's born. So this is a lesson we could take. So there's a nice quote from the Srimad-Bhagavatam that says this in this regard. So in the Srimad-Bhagavatam 11th Canto, chapter 29, verse 10, it says, quote, one should take shelter of holy places where my saintly devotees reside, and one should be guided by the exemplary activities of my devotees, who appear among the demigods, demons, and human beings, end quote. So how as far as Prahlad Maharaj appearing in the family of demons, this is described in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, 7th Canto, chapter 4, verse 33. So it says, quote, although Prahlad Maharaj was born in a family of asuras, which means demons, he himself was not an asura, but a great devotee of Lord Vishnu. Unlike the other asuras, he was never envious of Vaishnavas. He was not agitated when put into danger because he was a spiritual valedictorian. Of course, it doesn't say that, but essentially that's what is described. And he was neither directly nor indirectly interested in the fruits and activities described in the Vedas. Indeed, he considered everything material to be useless, and therefore he was completely devoid of material desires. He always controlled his senses and life air, and being of steady intelligence and determination, he subdued all lusty desires. Quote, so in this particular verse, it describes that the difference between a devotee and a demon. So of course, we discussed that before. A devotee has good qualities, a demon has bad qualities. And what are some of those good qualities? Humility, appreciation, forgiveness. And what are some of those bad qualities? Pride, envy, and vengeance. So it's described in this verse that in Asura, so it says, Prahlad, unlike the other Asuras, he was never envious of Vaishnavas. So we can understand that envy makes us a demon, an Asura, because is very simple. As far as the difference between a demon or a devotee or a materialist and a spiritual, what's the demarcation? A materialist is happy when they're honored and unhappy when someone else is honored. But if a spiritualist is happy when they're honored and unhappy when someone else is honored, then what's the demarcation between a materialist and a spiritualist? Same thing. A materialist becomes vengeful when they're mistreated. But if a spiritual also becomes vengeful when they're mistreated, then what's the demarcation between a materialist and a spiritual? So we can understand that the difference is that a devotee has good qualities and a demon has bad qualities. So basically, what is the use of spending all our time in sadhu sangha, nama kirtan, bhagavad shrava, maturva, srimutir shraddha, associating with devotees, chanting the holy name, hearing the Bhagavatam, coming to holy places and worship a deity, that if things don't go our way, we act just like a materialist who never associated with devotees, who never chanted the holy name, who never read the Bhagavatam, who never visited a holy place, or who never worshiped the deity. Then that means it's practically almost a useless waste of time. Bahu jama kade yadi shravanam kirtan tabu tanapaya krishna pade premadan. So the Chaitanya Charitamrita in the Adi Leela, chapter 8, verse 16, it says that even if you chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, even for millions of births, if you're committing offenses which are due to bad qualities, due to things not going our way, then you're actually wasting your time in one sense. Of course, there's benefit, but you're not getting the full potential. You will not get, what's that highest potential? You will not get the premadan, the love of God. And so this is a very important lesson we can take. So if we're acting just like a materialist when things don't go our way, and of course we're conditioned souls, but still, that's why we hear the Bhagavatam, how to improve our character. So that way, okay, next time when somebody's honored, we could put on a show, we may act like we're happy, but internally if we're feeling any negativity, like, oh, they don't deserve it, I deserve it, they're not a devotee, waste our time criticizing others, if that animosity is there, then we can understand that actually we need to go deeper into our Krishna consciousness. So therefore, in the Bhagavatam, in Prabhupada's purport to the 7th canto, chapter 5, verse 12, and this is a verse regarding the teachings of Prahlad Maharaj. So Prabhupada in that purport to 7.5.12 of the Bhagavatam, he says, one should not be proud of one's own service, but one should appreciate the service of others. So that's the nature of the material. In other words, Prabhupada, on the flip side of the coin, in the material world, people are so proud of their own service that they never appreciate the service of others. So the question we can ask ourselves is this, that do we try to outreach to the devotees or do we try to outdo the devotees? And the reality is that we cannot outdo anyone because Krishna can empower anyone and everyone. So there's a pastime like this. So once upon a time, this is actually explained in the I don't have the reference, but basically in the 2nd canto, I believe, of the Bhagavatam, Narada Muni went to Lord Brahma. He says, my dear Brahma, I can see that you're praying and meditating. And why do we pray or meditate? Because we pray or meditate because there's somebody more powerful than us. So Narada Muni says, my dear Brahma, you are known in the universe as the greatest, most powerful being. But is there someone more powerful than you? Because I could see you're praying and you're meditating. And why do we pray or meditate? We can see that when things don't go our way, when we have financial difficulty, right? We pray to the Lord. When we have some health problems, we could understand that COVID is more powerful than us. Cancer is more powerful than us. Or our boss, who doesn't pay us enough, is more powerful than us. So why do we go to the Lord? Because he's the supreme being. He's more powerful than anyone. So he noticed, my dear Lord, my dear Father, Brahma, why are you praying? There must be somebody more powerful than you. And so Brahma was very humble, you could say. He says, yes, I'm praying to the Supreme Lord Krishna. I am not the supreme being within the universe. And so he was very humble about it. Now we could ask ourselves the same question. Is there someone more powerful than us. Like, here's Vaishnava Sevananda Prabhu. He's a really excellent, he's a really talented guitar player. And there was one devotee, one Mataji, who asked him for guitar lessons last week, right? And so if she asks you, are you the most powerful guitar player in the universe, what would your response be? Of course I am, he said. So that's the natural nature of the material world. But actually, Jimi Hendrix, when he was on one TV show growing up, somebody asked him the same question. Oh, you know what I'm talking about, Sevananda. See, so Vaishnava Sevananda. So somebody asked Jimi Hendrix, are you the best guitar player in our time? So what did Jimi Hendrix say? Jimi Hendrix says, he was sitting, The group show. Say it in the mic so we can hear it. So maybe other devotees who are more appreciative and aware of Jimi Hendrix.
Hendrix was very humble when it came to his playing, and he looked up to just about everybody. Mm-hmm. But he really looked up to the guitar player that was in the group Chicago, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And he thought that he was a better guitar player than him. Mm-hmm. You know.
Jimi Hendrix thought he was a better guitar player?
No, Jimi Hendrix thought the other person
thought that other person was better than him. Yes. So, but on this TV show, so this person asked Jimi Hendrix, are you the best guitar player in our time? So Jimi Hendrix, he was sitting in his chair. He says, I'm the best guitar player sitting in his chair at this moment. And so it's a very humble response. And so in much the same way, Lord Brahma, he told Narada Muni, yes, Krishna, the Supreme Lord, he's more powerful than me. So we should be very humble that there's many things more powerful than us. If somebody asks us, whether we're a guitar player, whether we're a mridanga player, whether we're a Bhagavatam speaker, whether we worship the deity, is there anyone more powerful than you? Then what should our response be? Yes. My lust is more powerful than me. My pride is more powerful than me. My bad health is more powerful than me. My boss is more powerful than me. Everything and everyone is more powerful than me. Then what to speak of other devotees? If Krishna empowers them, then they're more powerful than me. And if they're not more powerful than me, Krishna could change that real humble. So we're like Gopi Bhartu Kamalayor Dasa Dasa Anandas. We're trying to be the humble servant of the servant. So if you don't think you're lower than other devotees, then Krishna could change that at any moment. So that's why we're always in the mood of the humble servant. Yes, we're always appreciating, glorifying devotees. And if you don't, like I said, I always say this, you could experiment with both mentalities, pride or humility, and see how it works out for you. And so basically, if we're always disturbed, if we're always fault-finding, then that probably indicates that we need to go deeper into our Krishna consciousness. And so I don't think I really have too many other points to discuss today. I do, but maybe I'll incorporate into the questions and answers section. So anyway, I guess that's our topic for today. I could go on for many points, but I would like to leave some time for discussions. It's 8:33, I believe. So are there any other? Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Thank you for class. Thank you for talking about guitars and Jimi Hendrix and stuff. I really appreciate that. One thing about, you touched on so many things in your class, humility, so many different things. One thing in truth, personally, when I think of ability, when Krishna says, I am the ability in man, so I think of the same ability as in every artist and every musician, every scholar, is Krishna. So when it comes to being the best at something, like if someone really say, are you the best? I would say, well, I'm not doing anything. Krishna's doer. I'm just trying to be a channel for him. So maybe you could share any insight that you have on what it takes to be not necessarily the best, but to get better and better and better at something in relationship to being the best, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yes. Martin Luther King Jr., he has a speech called Drum Major Instinct. And it's about a speech, drum major instinct. And it's a speech about distinguishing between pride and humility. So he says, if you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. But recognize this. In the Bible, Jesus says that he is a servant. He who becomes a servant first is the greatest of all. And so then Martin Luther King further says, what this essentially means is that Jesus was saying, I want you to be the first in humility. I want you to be the first in generosity. I want you to be first in moral excellence. This is the new definition of greatness. So yes, you could be first or the best in pride, or you could be the best in humility. You could try to exalt yourself first, or you could try to exalt other devotees first. So that's the best. There's two special and the best. So you could experiment with both of them. Experiment with both of them. And one thing I forgot about the pastime Lord Brahma is that he was very humble, or was he? He says, Lord Krishna, he's the best. He's more powerful than me. And is this truly humility? Yes, it's one level of humility, but it's not the ultimate level of humility. Why? Because it's very easy to glorify those who are obviously more powerful than us, like Lord Krishna, like our own guru, right? But to appreciate our own peers, our own devotees, that's much more difficult. So therefore, Lord Krishna orchestrated a pastime to see how deep Lord Brahma's humility went. So once upon a time, this is describing the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Once upon a time, our four-headed Brahma, he entered Dwarka and he approached the gatekeeper. And he says, my dear gatekeeper, I am the great Lord Brahma. I would like to see Lord Krishna at once. So then the gatekeeper asked Lord Brahma, he says, which Brahma are you? What do you mean, which Brahma am I? I am the Michael Jordan Brahma. I am the Oprah Winfrey Brahma. I am the whoever's the best in this world in whatever field. I am the greatest Brahma. What do you mean? I am the one and only Brahma. Imagine that Michael Jordan, like, which Michael Jordan are you? I know somebody way better than you. It's a ego boost. So anyways, the gatekeeper, he says, okay, four-headed Brahma, let me go tell Lord Krishna. So he was very nonchalant about it. He wasn't impressed at all. So he went to tell Lord Krishna. And so Lord Krishna, so the gatekeeper told Lord Krishna, and therefore Lord Krishna approached Lord Brahma. And so Lord Krishna asked Lord Brahma, yes, how may I serve you today? And Lord Brahma said, well, before I tell you what I originally came here for, I have another question. What did the gatekeeper mean when he said, which Brahma am I? I thought I was the one and only Brahma, within this universe. And so what did Lord Krishna tell Brahma? He says, yes, you're the only Brahma within your own little universe. So in much the same way in this world, we have our own little universe, right? We think we're the greatest person, just like an athlete. What happens when an athlete, just like when I was in high school, I did the high jump. When I was 10 years old, I wasn't into not much track and field, but I like to jump. So I did the high jump in track. And so I won a gold medal when I was 10 years old. And I beat I'll never forget, I beat this boy named Sergio. He was my age, of course. He was slightly smaller than me. And so when we were both 11 years old, I never did it the next year. And then when I was a couple years later, when I was 12 years old, I did the high jump again. And so then I met this same boy again, Sergio. And when I talked to him, I did not recognize him. He grew like 5 inches, and he was like way more powerful. And I was scared, literally. I was like, and I kind of figured I could clearly understand I'm not winning this year. So my whole point is things could change. And so the whole point is that I was the best at that moment in time. I won the gold medal when I was 10 years old. When I was 12 years old, he completely destroyed me. Like, he jumped like way higher than me, like a foot higher than me. And I was completely humbled. maybe because he worked so hard. Not only that, so the lesson is that we may be the best in our high school at whatever, or let's take the Olympics, at track and field. We may be best at track and field in college, but what happens when you go to international competition? You probably might be the worst. You might be the worst. So in much the same way, Lord Krishna says, yes, you are the best in your own little universe, but there are many universes, and there are many Brahmas who have more heads than you, who are more brilliant. So basically the lesson is that anyone can be humble, yes, before Lord Krishna or before our home guru, but try being humble with other devotees. And so it's usually competition. And so the lesson is that Kali Kaleta Dharma, Krishna Nama Sankirtan, Krishna Shakti Vina Nahi Tara Pravartana. The lesson is that Krishna could give his Shakti to anyone, even a child, like Prahlad Maharaj. So why are we so proud of that we're the best? It could change at any moment. So always be humble with devotees, always be respectful. And in this way, your relationships will always be very sweet. But if you want to be the best, then try that. See how it works out for you. It won't work out too well. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. But I think we have 4 minutes left. Maybe we could get one tweak in last tweak. So.
It may not always be very clear to persons what humbleness and tolerance is. It may not always be clear to persons coming to devotional life what humbleness and tolerance is or what it looks like.
Ah, wow, that's a beautiful. Go ahead. Yeah.
From what you were describing, the natural tendency is to, within one's own universe in one's head, see oneself as the top of the heap.
Yeah.
So, would you say that examples can be comprehended in that state of mind if one is actually seeing examples of humility and tolerance, if one's head is in a space of being on top of the heap?
If I understand your question, well, the answer is, hopefully I'll answer, that you cannot see humility or tolerance or any good qualities. Just like when you're at work, right? Your coworkers mistreat you, potentially. Your boss mistreats you, but you tolerate, right? And then you go home, and what happens? You take all that negativity you experience at work and with your boss and your co-workers, and you take it out on your friends and family. So that actually wasn't real tolerance. That was a imitation tolerance. So the reality is that we cannot see tolerance, nor can we judge whether others are. We can only judge ourselves in the ultimate conclusion. And this is the danger of judging others, because, like you said, you can't see our good qualities. That's why it's always best to work on yourself. I'll give you an example. That sometimes Krishna wants his devotees to set a bad example. Like we're always looking to, oh, you should be a good example. But we see in so many pastimes, Krishna wants his devotees to set a bad example. Because in this world, why do people set a good example? Sometimes for prestige. I want to be known as a great saint devotee, who's always practicing proper Vaishnava etiquette and behavior. But what happens, the reality is that we're all conditioned souls, despite being devotees, and we make mistakes. And what happens when we make mistakes? We try to cover up those mistakes. But we see the great devotees never do that, like Parikshit Maharaj. He made a mistake. He put a snake on Samika Rishi, but he never tried to cover it up. He never, like politicians, to delete all their videos that cover up their mistakes or try to kill people. He never did that. So the reality is we all make mistakes. And so there was one other point I would want to mention, important point regarding what you said. Oh, yes. So sometimes Krishna wants his devotees to set a bad example. There's many examples like it. One of the famous examples from the Mahabharata is where Yudhishthira Maharaj was known to make a vow of truth. He made a vow that I will always be truthful and never tell a lie. So while he was on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Lord Krishna told him to tell a lie. And what was this lie? The purpose of telling a lie is that there was one, you could say they were all devotees. Karna, he was defeating the Pandavas. He was destroying them so much. And the only way, I think it was not Karna, who was the father of Ashwatthama? Oh yeah, their teacher, their warrior teacher. What was his name? Dronacharya. So he says Dronacharya is defeating us all. He's defeating us all, and we have no means to defeat him. And it's described that the only way we could defeat Dronacharya is that if he heard from a reliable source that his son, Ashwatthama, Dronacharya's son name was Ashwatthama. So if Dronacharya heard from a reliable source that his son was killed, then he would become so dejected, so weak, that we could easily defeat him and win the whole battle of Kurukshetra. So it's described that Bhima, he knew that in the enemy's camp, there was an elephant named Ashwatthama. There was an elephant named Ashwatthama. So this elephant had the same name as Dronacharya's son. So Bhima went and killed Ashwatthama, the elephant. And so Lord Krishna, he told Yudhishthira, you're a reliable source. Everyone knows that you never tell a lie. You always tell the truth. So tell Drona that his son, Ashwatthama, died. So Yudhishthira, he was reluctant because he says, I have a perfect track record of being a perfect devotee. I always set a good example. What will happen if I set a bad example? So the lesson is that sometimes Krishna asks his devotees to set bad examples to see how much we're attached to being known as great saints. Great saints. How much, arrogant we are, how much we're attached to that prestige. And so finally, Yudhishthira was reluctant. And he says, on the battlefield, my dear Dronacharya, he says, Ashwatthama died. And then at that moment, Krishna rang his conch shell, I believe. And then he says, when the conch shell was ringing, he says, the elephant. But he couldn't hear that. And so in this way, this is one example where Lord Krishna asked his devotees. And the final example is in the Mahabharata, chapter 24, part 2 or part 1 or part 2, I don't remember, but this is by Krishna Dharmadas. It's a long story, but I'll just give an example. Lord Krishna asked Arjuna to glorify himself for a particular reason, because he was going to kill his own brother, Yudhishthira. I'm not going to go into the details, but he says, "Why don't kill your brother?" He says, if you glorify yourself, that will be just as equal to suicide, because no respectable person glorifies himself. So he asked Arjuna to glorify yourself. So Arjuna says, I'm tall, I'm dark, I'm handsome, I'm the best archer, all the ladies love me. He began to praise himself. So if somebody saw Arjuna praising himself, you may say he's arrogant, right? But yes, he is arrogant, but that arrogance is his humility because he's following that direction of the Lord. So the conclusion is that we all have a relationship with the Lord. This is why it's very detrimental to judge whether others are proud or arrogant, because even if they are arrogant, that arrogance could be their humility because they're receiving inspiration from the Lord. So therefore, the conclusion is, there's a saying, nothing will give you greater peace than minding your own business. So that's what our teachings say. Mind your own business. Focus on your relationship with your own mentors, your own relationships, and don't worry about what anyone else is doing. Otherwise, you could experiment with it, see how that works out for you. It probably won't work too well. So anyway, thank you. So Grantara Srimad-Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Gaura Premanande Hare Hare Bo.